Oh, I don't think he knows what happened, but it would really upset him if he found out.
Tell Professor Bear!
Oh, I've said too much already.
Tell Professor Bear now! Now!
Oh, I accidentally knocked SpongeBob's toothbrush into the toilet, and then I put it back on the counter without washing it. Professor Bear?
Cue the intro! Ahoy, mateys, and welcome aboard to the only podcast that'll purloin your cold, icy heart with the fiery tones from my throat. I'm ready! A SpongePod Squarecast. I'm your host, Captain Eric, and it's a pleasure to welcome you aboard as we continue our sail through the 4th season of SpongeBob SquarePants. And I have to say, as we continue our sail through the 4th season, it cements itself as a solid season in SpongeBob history. Do not sleep on season 4. Those cooking behind the scenes have put together a pretty darn good post-movie, post-Hillenburg era season. And week in and week out, I'm not going through and watching these episodes weeks before I'm recording. I'm saving them right before I'm recording. So it's enjoyable to see, even though there's a speed bump here or there. The ride is great. I'm enjoying it thus far, and I hope if you go back through and watch these as well, you find enjoyment alongside with me. This week's episode, the Pink Purloiner, which the word purloin is certainly not one you're going to run into in your everyday life. In fact, is there anyone out there in the world listening to this, either you yourself or do you know of anybody who would use the word purloin as an example of stealing? To purloin something is to steal, to loot, to take, to pilfer. And even though each of those terms essentially mean the same thing, there is a reason for each and every one of their existence, whether or not it's based on the time that they were first uttered and used, or in the terms of purloining, comes at the act of stealing something, usually from someone you personally know in a breach of trust. So you wouldn't use the word purloin if you walked into a store and you stole something off of the rack. You just didn't purloin anything unless you walked into your friend's store and they trust you. Then I guess that would be an act of purloining. I don't know how I would personally feel if someone came up to me and asked if I purloined something. If they were accusing me of stealing something, but they used that term. In the moment, I don't think I would be able to think of anything else but SpongeBob, because it's my only real frame of reference when it comes to this term, even though I know the definition and that I know it comes at a more personal theft, but I would crack up a little bit. I would have to assume the other person themselves were a SpongeBob fan. In some way, I would ask them, wait a minute, are you a fan? That might piss them off a little bit more if they legitimately think I may have purloined whatever they thought. But I have to imagine if they're throwing a term like that around, I know them a little bit more personally. Not to throw around all of these P words, but good thing I have my pop filter on. It's working overdrive today. But if my cousin came up to me and said, hey, did you purloin my lawnmower? I genuinely think I would be offended at his use of the word purloin. Buddy, you could have just asked if I stole your lawnmower, and I don't have a lawn. I live on a boat. That's a really stupid question for you to ask. But it's crazy to say that, because thinking of a more personal theft and thinking of myself, I myself have purloined in my past. Yep, it's true, and certainly it's nothing that I'm proud of. I have no idea why I'm running into so many P words in the Pink Purloiner episode, but it is what it is. I have purloined in the past. When I was a young captain, I was a lot more selfish. If I wanted an ice cream cone from the truck and my mom wouldn't give me the money for it, I would just take it myself and treat myself to an ice cream cone and then walk right in as if I wouldn't just get immediately punished right in front of her. There's another P word. Somebody should keep track of the amount of different P words that I run into in this episode, or that I plunge into, even ones I purposely add. Oh my goodness. Anyway, not to avoid the elephant in the room, not kicking you out today, buddy. But other than that, there's one story that haunts me to this day. And I would imagine that the parents of my friend would love to know that it still sits with me to this day. But one of my biggest regrets, and it is a purloined endeavor on my part, but one of my biggest regrets in my life was at the hands of me and a rented copy of Tony Hawk's Underground for the Nintendo GameCube, which wasn't rented by me or my family. My best friend Alex, who has appeared on this show very early on in the first season, Alex's family had the ability to rent out and purchase a lot more games than I had the ability to. So, not that there was a jealousy on my part, but I certainly spent more time at his house playing those games than he spent time at mine. And there wasn't a bigger series for me as a teenager, a young teenager, than Tony Hawk's Underground. The Tony Hawk series in general. Pro Skater 1 and 2 on the PlayStation, 3 and 4 on the GameCube, and then Tony Hawk's Underground changing the game with a new story mode blew my mind. We played it at his house, and I wanted to play it further. And I had asked Alex if I could borrow the game, and he, obviously said no because it was a rented game, and I decided, well, I'll have it for one night. I'll bring it back tomorrow morning. They won't even know it's gone. Well, they knew it was gone, and I was too proud to just admit, hey, I took it when I was asked. Alex came to me the next day. Hey, did you take this? No, I have no idea. And they were just searching in the house. They didn't really assume it was purloined at first, but must have been misplaced. At day 2 or 3, it was definitely a confirmation that there was something gone, and I was trying to get it back in the house safely so that no one would know. But before I could enact that plan, one call to my mother just to double check if Alex himself had left it over my house. That was the simple call. It wasn't even, oh yeah, Eric took it. But alas, my mom found the game in my room. And lo and behold, the jig was up. I had it the entire time. Alex and I legitimately had a SpongeBob and Patrick style dramatic kind of confrontation on a bridge in our town. Thinking back to it and thinking of the end of this episode, it very much fits in line there of a out of emotions and apology, and you're my best friend, and we've done too much to let this one instance get between us, and certainly things moving forward for the next year or two were awkward with his parents, but time went on, people grow. I certainly outgrew any sort of need to look at something someone else had and to go, I want that more than they want it. Even if it's borrowing it for a night, even if it's a Mr. Krabs style steal where you're quote-unquote borrowing it. But my intentions were to fully return it. But unfortunately, it doesn't matter. Even if you borrow something unintentionally for an hour or two, even if your intentions are all good, you purloin, even for a second, it sticks with you. You've done something wrong. And that's what this episode is about. It's all about the possibility of purloining. And what's crazy is even though I found myself on the Patrick side of things at least a few times in my life, I have been on the SpongeBob side of things as well. So this episode certainly brings up a ton. The Pink Purloiner is the first half of the 79th episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, and it first premiered in the United States on February 19th, 2007. But as is with all of these later Season 4 episodes, they first premiered on DVD on the Volume 2 Season 4 DVD that released January 9th, 2007. This episode was storyboard directed by Luke Brookshire and Tom King, who wrote this episode alongside Stephen Banks. Our animation director is Tom Yasumi, our technical director is Vincent Waller, and our supervising producer, wait, I gotta get my Tony Chimmel going, if you know, you know. Supervising producer is Paul Tibbett. Yeah! I'm not 100% sure why. It may be due to its connection with it being his one hobby, but I genuinely love episodes that let SpongeBob explore the love of his hobby a little bit more. When you get to see a little bit more of the jellyfishing world. Because SpongeBob, although he's into being a crook, I was thinking of cook and frying at the same time. And that's the word that came out. I'm keeping that in. I'm not even editing that out. So SpongeBob, yeah, of course, is a crook. That's all about this episode. Isn't that crazy? Maybe that's another reason why. What a moment. So, SpongeBob loves being a frying cook. It certainly is a hobby of his, but we see enough of that day to day. How many episodes are at the Krusty Krab? How many Krabby Patties have we seen SpongeBob make? So we've exercised that love a lot. But jellyfishing is like his nerdy passion. It's the thing that most people in the universe of SpongeBob SquarePants, jellyfishing is seen as kind of this sideshow, nerdy sport that has its own conventions, and it's certainly treated as one of the nerdy aspects of their world, which is completely fine. I use that word in love because I'm a nerd as well. I have a SpongeBob podcast here. Of course I'm a nerd. Jeez. But jellyfishing is kind of seen that way, as we have seen how other characters have treated the act of jellyfishing, and certainly how they use jellyfishing, like I mentioned, the convention part, which even though there are conventions for many things out there, let me tell you, even if there is a convention for something that wouldn't be considered nerdy, when you have a room condensed of fans and sellers alike of whatever you're celebrating, how can you not use the word nerdy in that moment? And it's just a word of love. It's not even a word of negativity in my heart. I mean, you're called it enough, I guess, when you're growing up. You just might as well accept it. But either way, jellyfishing is one of the one hobbies of SpongeBob SquarePants in which he does not get paid to engage in. He has his best friend that is also into jellyfishing. He has a few other friends he can bring out once in a while, but it's something he has a passion for. And that's what I'm trying to get at. When someone's passion is on full display, I have full attention. I love when someone is passionate about something. I was just talking to somebody this morning about the different teachers I've run into and the different teaching methods that they've had. And when it comes down to it, the subject matter that I'm being taught, it has nothing to do with what has my attention. Like, math doesn't really go above science. It's all on the teacher and how they're able to portray their passion in what they're teaching, because I have been through math classes where the teacher seems like they're more of a robot reading from a book. There really isn't too much care into what, they're going over, like parentheses and whatnot. But same class, different teacher, different passion, or just passion in general, different results on my end. So if you're passionate about something, whatever it is in this world, if you at least can portray that adequately, you have my full attention, is what I'm trying to get at. So I love when there are episodes engaging in SpongeBob's passion. So the beginning of this episode legitimately is one of my favorite possible starts to a SpongeBob episode, connecting it to the end as well. There is a 3-day migration, apparently, of every single, or at least a general mass amount of jellyfish from around the world. According to SpongeBob, all jellyfish from around the world come together once a year, or once every so often, for 3 days to trade jelly secrets. But, we all know what's going on with a migration. Do we? I'm not explaining it. With all of these jellyfish coming together, we have a colorful plethora of jellyfish on display that is just beautiful. I'm surprised that this hasn't been taken advantage of with the changing color palette of SpongeBob as the seasons have gone on. We have had a blue jellyfish before, which at one point was a rarity, but now to see the skies of jellyfish fields explode in color, it's beautiful. You have to, if you love SpongeBob in any way, you have to be happy for him in this moment to be able to see that sight as well, knowing even if you wouldn't really jellyfish or want to be around jellyfish, everybody out there, of course, wouldn't really want to go and touch a jellyfish. But even if you didn't want to engage in jellyfishing, you can still be happy for someone in their passion and in what they're doing. If you had a friend who was a race car driver, but you didn't watch racing, if they won something, you can still be happy for them, but not engage into whatever they're doing. Same thing here. We're friends of SpongeBob, enjoying what he's doing. And Patrick is right there with him, ready for this big 3-day migration. The names for some of these jellyfish, a little bit sus. A little bit sus if you ask me. I can't really say these without having such a childish mind. I apologize, but I blame whoever wrote these in as exotic jellyfish. But like Steve Zissou, let me pull out my book and tell you all about this jellyfish. A blue crusted blaster, a speckled squirter, a two-fisted jumper, and a golden-throated stinger, which genuinely made me laugh. The little opera singing of the golden-throated stinger got a giggle out of me. Of course, after the childish giggling over some of these names, I said them once, I'm not saying them again, but what a plethora of jellyfish to find in jellyfish fields. SpongeBob and Patrick are over the moon. They are over Pluto with what they have in front of them. Unfortunately for Patrick, his jellyfish net is not looking the best, whereas SpongeBob is pulling out what is known as Old Reliable, which is a jellyfish net we have heard of before. In a past episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, Old Reliable was brought up as SpongeBob's #1 jellyfish net. So hearing the word Old Reliable, or the name, if you will, is not new, but seeing the net in this episode, it seems to be a completely different net than the one previously used as quote-unquote all reliable, which may just be a nickname that SpongeBob gives whatever net he's currently using. It's totally fair. I feel like that would be something that if you had a net or a device, a tool called all reliable, that's the tool I always use. Once it breaks, you move on to another one that you always use, and even if not at first you call it all reliable, eventually those pants start fitting a little differently, you know? When you get a new pair of pants and you slip them on, and in the store they feel good, but they feel new. But after a week of wearing them around, 2 weeks maybe, they start feeling a little bit different. You put them on, and it's almost like a firm handshake. It's a handshake of a friend you know. And at that point, it's something that one time you put them on and that handshake feels a little different. You know, today is going to be a good day. Today's going to be a good one. That's when you know something settles in. And then you can go, this is old reliable now. And I think that's exactly what happened with the net situation here, because this new net is state of the art. Every single jellyfish net we have seen thus far has had a bit of a bamboo structure to it. Whereas old reliable in this episode is titanium with a silicone grip and netting that seemingly won't break. SpongeBob is proud of this thing.
Oh, yeah.
When someone's really passionate about something and they have their old reliable, whatever it is, whatever you're into, if there's a tool or a piece of your process that is irreplaceable, your go-to, that is your old reliable. And when you have an old reliable, you take care of that thing, or you don't. You take it for granted, and once it's gone, you go, man, that was a good tool. I've had that happen with tools and markers that have been a part of my artistic process that unfortunately I didn't take the best of care of. And then when they were gone, you start thinking about those moments when you first used them, when they were crisp, when they were in their prime. You can think about that and know you should have taken better care of your tools so that the next time you have one, you have a deeper appreciation of it. Sometimes it takes a lot, especially when you're younger. Something like a marker, there's no thought process to how much that costs. You abuse them, use them, abuse them, toss them, and then 20 years later, here you are having to buy your own markers. You take care of those things a little bit differently. So SpongeBob has his passion here for this jellyfishing net, all reliable. He's showing it off to Patrick, who unfortunately visibly has one of the most beaten up jellyfishing nets we have seen in this show's entire run up to this point. Such a broken net. Its netting is completely shredded, which negates even its purpose in the first place. But then half of its handle is snapped off, and then Patrick has hammered a piece of wood with a nail to the handle of his jellyfishing net, which I'm surprised it actually ended up on the handle instead of his forehead. But here he is with this ratty old net, and it disintegrates in his hands.
And it's gone.
No more jellyfishing for Patrick. And once Old Reliable is brought up into the situation, Patrick says something very interesting, and I quote, let me pull up the, I'd kill for a net like that. End quote. Patrick Star, ladies and gentlemen. I'd kill for a net like that. Somebody could take that so seriously once you bring the word kill into the situation. But in general, going back and forth conversation, come on. That's just a general use. That's an exclamation. It's over the top. It's meant to show in that moment, I'd kill for a net like that. If you're a literalist, if you're somebody who takes everything at face value, you may hear someone say something like that and perk up and think, wait a minute. This person just admitted to the capability of murder. Murder? Yes, murder. But in actuality, it's just sarcastic. It's comedic. I'd kill for that boatmobile. I wouldn't actually kill for that boatmobile. I shouldn't have to actually say that, but there are people out there who do not get sarcasm, do not hear or understand when you may be inflecting something through your words, even if it's in a comedic way. They're just hearing things at face value. And that's completely fair. I know that might be hard to think of if you haven't actually engaged with someone like this, but from experience, there genuinely are people out there that part of sarcasm that we have created in our language, it's nuanced. It's very subtle at times. And depending on the person, sometimes what you may perceive as, of course I'm being sarcastic, it may not have to fly with everybody. It's kind of the point I'm getting across, is that even if in your world, your best friend understands your sarcasm, your parents, your family, outside of your town, you may engage with someone who doesn't, and the way you come across may be off-putting. Not the edible kind, Putting, not the Harley Quinn kind. But that is a real possibility. So, genuinely, when you're meeting new people, it's best to stay away from sarcasm or saying things in a over-the-top way in which if you have to then over-explain yourself, it's just a messy situation. So you know how you avoid that? By not even going near it. So don't even say I'd kill for that around people that don't understand the way you speak or how you come off comedically. Just be careful. Be careful in 2023. Patrick, of course, is not talking about committing homicide within Bikini Bottom or a murder on a person in Bikini Bottom, but he then goes on to explain that he would kill something small, like a carrot, which, for that to be the first thing that Patrick thinks about for something to kill, a carrot, rated PG-13. That is a deep-cut South Park joke. I apologize. A Rob Schneider one. That's for like 1% of you out there who even get that reference. But I love that right after Patrick mentions the carrot here, he mentions the possibility of a spider because of how much he dislikes them, which is a great callback all the way back to the very first season of this show of SpongeBob SquarePants, where SpongeBob, during Home Sweet Pineapple, lost the pineapple and had to spend his time looking for someone to stay with, and during his night at Patrick's house, found out that Patrick has intense and frightful nightmares about spiders to the point that he will pick up his rock and destroy whatever he perceives as a spider, including SpongeBob himself. I absolutely love this subtle reference to season 1 that is going on throughout this episode, between the idea of SpongeBob's net being called Old Reliable and that being a callback itself, to this little mention of Patrick and his dislike of spiders. It's one of those kinds of jokes or subtle references that I absolutely love. They're my favorite to understand, and they're my favorite to actually dish out. Many of the audio clips that I use in the post-editing of the episodes are usually little references to something else, something that makes me laugh. I genuinely love the hashtag if you know style kinds of jokes. The real, utter specific ones that I know you shouldn't push so much into, but I love catching somebody off guard because I've heard from people when something has been used before, and not even necessarily in this podcast, but when I have gone and put in very specific jokes or parts into projects of mine, and I'm not purposely trying to find P words to add on to the list here, but when someone can get a reference that I've thrown in, it's the ultimate high for me. It's wonderful. It's like, oh, you got it. I love that. So even in this situation, even in Patrick mentioning his dislike of spiders, if you have been paying attention to SpongeBob since the beginning, if you remember that episode, it brings a nice little smile to your face. Nice little reference, nice little callback, a not in your face one. Of course, if they had Patrick screaming spiders and slamming something, that would be an in your face reference, but something very subtle here. I just can't explain how much I love it. Overnight, after day one of the migration of all of the jellyfish, SpongeBob misplaces Old Reliable. Now, he immediately goes and assumes that someone stole this net from its resting place, which is in this cabinet in his pineapple, which is a situation I have found myself in, which is almost, I would have to say, ironic or karma for purloining a few times in my life, is that when something has gone missing, when I was living with roommates and had other people going in and out of my bedroom, even at my mom's house, there would be times where something would go missing, and depending on my memory of where it could be or my last use of it, there were times where I would go to the assumption that someone must have stolen it. And I don't have specifics at this moment in time. There is one object that I can think of, a pop. Didn't purposely think of another P word, but a Funko Pop that was stolen from my home at one point. There was somebody that was in my home that was a friend of a friend, didn't really know them really that well. The item was a gift. It was a present for Christmas time, so I knew it was in this grouping of gifts, and then all of a sudden it wasn't there. And for what the pop was, I knew that this person was a fan of those things. There were other pieces of evidence other than just one or two connections, but either way, other times I've just been wrong. I just misplaced it, and that I assumed someone must have stolen this. Look around for it. It's not here. And then eventually you find it. Or eventually it's in a spot that you forgot you placed it there, and then it all comes back to you. Oh, wait a minute. Forgot I put it there. But to go down a route of assumption before any evidence is wild. SpongeBob at first, though, goes to Patrick. His net is missing. Let's put up flyers all over town for this jellyfishing net, which, you know, for certain objects, if somebody steals your car, for example, I can understand putting up flyers in a neighborhood, in and around a city or a town, because that's a pretty pricey object. It's a big expense right there. So you want to get that out to as many people as possible. And I guess flyers are still effective. It's still an eye-catching part of being in this world. But for a jellyfishing net, I guess in our world, the equivalent would be a fishing rod. which is, I know, a little morbid for the characters in Bikini Bottom. But imagine if you had an old reliable fishing rod and then someone stole it, quote unquote. Then you put up flyers for this fishing rod around town. Not to giggle, but I would want that rod to be found, but I feel like there would be other options other than just the flyers for a fishing rod.
It doesn't matter what you think!
Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I feel like that kind of process to find an object like that, there could be other ways or other methods or other things to do, like find the pawn shop in town and go, hey man, if anybody comes in with this jellyfishing net, let us know. That, of course, would need the flyer to be a necessity, but the way that SpongeBob and Patrick place up these flyers are both equally ineffective. SpongeBob takes 30 flyers or so and essentially connects them together on a wall. He spreads them apart, but they're all still bunched together. And Patrick just staples an entire packet of flyers onto a pole. Both of them look at each other and realize, this isn't working, this isn't good. But I love that even though we can point to Patrick's as being a waste, but equally when you look at the way SpongeBob was posting up those flyers, they've done this before. They were posting up flyers earlier this season for Gary. They should know to spread these things around. Can you imagine if SpongeBob actually paid for a billboard for Old Reliable? Or if someone actually had a fishing rod in our world that loved it that much to pay a reward and for the advertisement of a billboard that my tool is missing, I need it back. I can understand even a car for that one. I'm trying to think of what's the threshold for the purchase of billboard ad space. What would be not ridiculous to ridiculous? A bike? If somebody stole your bike, would that be worth it? I don't know. I guess if Pee Wee Herman had access to enough money, maybe a billboard for his stolen bike would have made sense. That would have cut down the cross-country adventure part of things. Maybe somebody would have then caught that on the set. Going down a weird path. But back to Old Reliable. Someone has this net, and they're not letting SpongeBob know of this. He posts these flyers, goes home, and waits by his phone. We get a classic bit of Patrick being the one clogging up the phone lines, just calling SpongeBob, double-checking if someone had found the net. But of course, hey, buddy, if you're on the phone, how could someone get through? I guess they don't have call waiting in these shell phones, but they should get on that. I mean, I know that these things are kind of wireless, but the technology is a little bit weird here that they have, they don't have. Somehow, SpongeBob, and I forgot this, he paid for his advertisement of the jellyfishing net, Old Reliable gone missing, as front page news of the Bikini Bottom newspaper. That's not easy. He had to pay for that. That is some significant ad space. So he may have not paid for a billboard in town, but he still put in some serious money into this retrieval, which is insane. On the news side of things, though, Perch Perkins is covering the migration of the jellyfish in jellyfish fields when SpongeBob hijacks the broadcast of the news to announce that his jellyfishing net is missing, which, you know, I think it's appropriate. You're covering the jellyfish migration. Here's one of the jellyfishers in town who actually cares about this thing, and his net is missing. You know, get the word out, Perch. Use your perch to get the word out. I don't see what the big deal is. He had such an attitude about it. Mr. Krabs, though, the second that he heard that there was a $12.38 reward for the retrieval of his net, Mr. Krabs, on the case. Now, if there is ever going to be a spin-off series for Mr. Krabs in the future, and I apologize if this actually comes to fruition, but I can't get the thought out of my head of a Mr. Krabs detective agency where you pay him money to retrieve things. His love and lust for cash is so grand that he becomes the world's greatest detective when even $1 is offered. But then the twist is somehow Mr. Krabs ends up with whatever they're pursuing and the money because he's spoiled and all that stuff. Mr. Krabs, we get a little bit with him. I love it. But it's during the nighttime, the next night, that SpongeBob notices Patrick is playing with a jellyfish net that we can clearly see as the audience is fully bamboo. And I'm sure, I know that they could pull that whole animation trick where if they want to show you one thing far away, it looks like one part, and then when the cartoon character comes up to it later on, it looks like something different. You can certainly pull something off like that, but Patrick was in such clear view, and the net was as well, that I think we're supposed to be on to the fact that Patrick doesn't have SpongeBob's all reliable, but SpongeBob, the second he starts putting some things together, including the fact that, wait a minute, Patrick's net disintegrated in his hand. How does he have a new one? He must have stolen mine, which is the wrong thing. You should never go down a route of assumption, especially on your best friend, which, I only really brought up my purloining story not just because it was an act of purloining, but because even though I was dishonest with him the first time he approached me, my best friend still came up to me and asked if I had his copy of Tony Hawk's Underground. And I said no. I was too proud in that moment. I didn't want to admit to him, to his face, that I had purloined it from his home. But I did, with every intention of getting it back in, but of course without getting caught. But that's not what happened. I learned a lesson, and that lesson sticks with me to this day, to this very day. It's an interesting thing with what you do as a kid or as a teenager and those little moments that stick with you. It's interesting. But I bring it up because SpongeBob here, I'm appalled of everything that goes on in this episode. I'm truly appalled that SpongeBob just can't go up to his best friend to go, hey, do you have my jellyfishing net? Like, he kind of alludes to it, but it's always that. It's always, let's beat around the bush, which is funny because there's an actual bush in this episode, but that involves Patrick. But it's never direct. Of course, if it was direct, we wouldn't have an episode. So I understand that. I get the necessity for the need at hand, but I feel like there could have been a different way to this. And it is addressed. I'm glad that it is at least addressed with Patrick later on. But now SpongeBob is going through his entire day with the idea that Patrick is the one to blame for the theft or the purloining of Old Reliable. It has to be Patrick. And who better to get something out of you than good old Confess-A-Bear? And we have a Confess-A-Bear right here. There we go. With his own microphone to record this conversation. Doesn't really talk back. How are you, Confess-A-Bear? Oh, I guess he's a fan of Sega. Cool. Confess-A-Bear is actually a really funny bit in this episode. He's the character you're staring at on YouTube that Cap is holding there in the picture. Confess-A-Bear is just a teddy bear with a microphone really visibly attached to the arm of the bear. Not really going to fool anybody other than Patrick, but it's really interesting watching this episode in the same week with the Five Nights at Freddy's trailer dropping and the posters, because in that series at some point, I believe someone does have a bear with a microphone attached to it, or a walkie-talkie of some sort, and is using a bear to communicate with somebody else, which is just really interesting. It's a really interesting coincidence to see this bear getting dropped down and having that trailer drop in the same week. So Confess-A-Bear is handed off to Patrick as a companion. SpongeBob, meanwhile, though, goes off into the distance and is communicating through Confess-A-Bear to try to get Patrick to admit to whatever is inside of him, whatever secrets he's withholding. This definitely feels a lot like Secret Box. It is certainly giving off some of those similar vibes where SpongeBob wants something within Patrick. In that episode, it's physically a box, but it's actually the knowledge that he's looking after. It's not even whatever's in it. He doesn't want to steal what's in the box. He just wants to know what's in the box. He just has to know. If Patrick just told him from the beginning that it was a string, oh, look at this string I'm laughing at, there would be no episode. We'd have something different. So in the same vein here, it's even though he's going after his net, he's just really looking for the information. He's looking for the admission to the theft, to the purloining. Patrick, though, admits to something that is bothering him, and it's something he actually did to SpongeBob. He doesn't want to upset SpongeBob, but he dropped SpongeBob's toothbrush into the toilet, fished it out, and then didn't clean it. Which, I know it's a subtle joke, the idea of a toothbrush getting dropped into a toilet, ha. But for me, I don't know if I'm the only one out there laughing at the idea of something underwater needing to be washed off. I know that there's the Goo Lagoon and there is a difference in the water that they actually use in their sinks and in the toilets. And for the majority of SpongeBob SquarePants, we ignore the fact that they're underwater. But anytime there's anything having to do with them ignoring that they're underwater, something even as subtle as I didn't wash your toothbrush, it makes me smile. It makes me laugh. So even Patrick saying that was a nice little big moment for me. SpongeBob is overreacting, washing off his tongue in the background of Patrick coming to emotional terms of having to admit to something, to Confess-A-Bear. Later on that night, SpongeBob sneaks into Patrick's rock, seeing him with some sort of net in hand, but as he approaches Patrick, he hides it behind his back, and although he's able to conjure up a third hand through his chest, when SpongeBob asks him, what's behind your back, he picks up one hand. He's still clearly holding something with his other hand, and when SpongeBob asks, let me see that other hand, somehow Patrick is able to push out a third hand through his chest. A really hilarious moment, if you ask me. After thinking about it more, though, he starts coming to terms, wait a minute, does my best friend actually have the ability to steal, to purloin my jellyfishing net? And this is when he thinks back to that phrase that Patrick used, I'd kill for a net like that. But this is where, and this can certainly happen in real life, but this is where someone's memory can work against themselves when you're thinking of something and you're thinking of the words exactly, but you have the inflection of the words wrong. And it's not that you're doing it on purpose, but it's okay to only remember one part of a situation. Clearly here, SpongeBob heard the words that Patrick used, but in remembering them, it made him come off a lot more sinister than how Patrick had originally said that statement. In fact, though, in SpongeBob's thought, we now get to see Patrick kill that carrot. He murders that carrot for Old Reliable, or he's at least imagining what Patrick is capable of, or what he would do for his net. And this just cements even more so what SpongeBob already believes, that Patrick, for some reason, is the one that stole his net. And his only evidence is seeing shadows or seeing Patrick far off in the distance with a net when his broke. But wouldn't the thought of Patrick got a new net, wouldn't that part come into play? I know that he's not rich or well off by any means. Most of his furniture, other than a bed, is made out of sand. And he does buy a decent amount of food from the Krusty Krab, but we don't get to see Patrick throw around money all that often. But he does still maintain himself. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could purchase or find a new net for jellyfishing. He's been able to keep up with SpongeBob up to this point, so I have no idea why all of the sudden SpongeBob decides, you know what? This guy he's capable of stealing something. He watches him for 8 hours. He pretends to go to work to then hide in a bush. See? Brought that bush up again. I told you it would come back around. And Patrick spends apparently 8 hours of the day standing in the same spot, not even looking around to any direction. He just stands there and stares at whatever he's staring at for 8 hours. SpongeBob can't believe it, and he says something interesting, and I quote, "You don't really know a guy until you've stared at him for 8 hours through high-powered binoculars." End quote. I have to imagine that some private eyes out there, some detectives, the sleuths of the world, the ones out there actually staring at people through binoculars, would probably agree with that statement. You really don't know someone until you've stared at them for 8 hours throughout their day. SpongeBob decides to go with his last-ditch effort of putting on a big, goofy handlebar mustache. Not a handlebar. The handlebar goes down, I believe. I forgot the name of this one. Or do some people still consider this? Let me look up. I don't want to get this wrong and upset the facial hair aficionados of the world. Handlebar mustache. Yeah, all right, that's considered a handlebar mustache. I know that there's the other variation that people consider a handlebar mustache, but the way SpongeBob has this mustache here is in fact a handlebar mustache, one that you can grab onto. He comes over to Patrick, presenting himself as an exquisite buyer of rare jellyfishing equipment, and he has been told that Patrick is within the grasp of one of the rarest jellyfishing nets that he can think of. "Sir, I will offer you $1 billion for that net." Patrick, though, has no idea what he's talking about. He plays dumb at first before he shows off that he does indeed have a net in his possession, a net that belongs to SpongeBob. And this is where SpongeBob reveals himself and completely lays into Patrick that he finally has it. He finally has the confirmation that Patrick is the one that has his jellyfishing net all reliable. When Patrick opens up the jellyfish net case that he's been holding, once it was discovered he had this out, he brings up that it was a gift. Yes, this is a net for SpongeBob. This is SpongeBob's property, but it's a gift that Patrick either purchased or made for SpongeBob. etched on it for SpongeBob due to his net going missing. What a best friend. What a best friend to notice what your friend is going through and to make sure that you can rectify that. And then to be blamed, to be pointed to, and to have blame put on you for stealing something when the question was never even asked, hey, do you have my stuff in the first place? Do you have my property? Didn't even give Patrick that privilege to answer that question. Just went on seeing very minimal pieces of evidence and was just going off, continuing his assumption that Patrick must have been the purloiner or the perpetrator of this entire ordeal. And where did that lead him? Patrick putting him in his place. One of my favorite moments of this episode, even if I have a problem with how far SpongeBob took things, if he's going to take it that far, I'm glad that Patrick actually pointed that out. Of, well, here's my deed of a best friend, getting you a net that you misplaced or somebody stole. Either way, you're without a net. I'm going out of my way to get you one when I don't have one in the first place. And instead of just asking me if I have it, you go down the route of assumption that I stole it. What a good friend you are. Here's not only the net, but I'm also going to leave town as well. While a bus pulls up as Patrick walks over to a bus stop with some of his belongings. I don't like the dramatics being turned up so much here, but then again, I love that Patrick put his foot down. I think he has every right to be upset, and if he feels that his best friend in this town is going to treat him this way, well, I have to leave. I mean, that's some real commitment to the friendship there. As the bus pulls up, SpongeBob realizes, wait, this is really happening, and pleads to Patrick a little bit before saying goodbye. As the bus driver, which this is my favorite part of the episode, such a perfect bit for this bus driver who, since season 1, whoever has been driving those buses has gone through a lot, busing these two to and from Glove World, Rock Bottom, wherever they needed to go. SpongeBob and Patrick are notorious on the bus lines. And as the bus driver steps off to bark at whoever is holding up, not coming on the bus, he realizes, oh, it's you two. You left this on the bus the other day. And he gives SpongeBob Old Reliable. Of course, on the way home from Jellyfish Fields, SpongeBob left his net on the bus. And at this point, now that it's out in the open, that Patrick is not a thief, the net is back home, SpongeBob pleads to Patrick, please stay home, don't leave. And the patrons on the bus are all in love with this. They're just oohing and eyeing from the windows as the bus driver just yells at them. They do this every week, which I know that there was another note here of the bus driver saying something of the net. You leave this in here every week. These guys do this every week. Even if it's exactly this scenario with Old Reliable, which is funny, the idea of the over theatrics of their adventures and this bus driver just pointing out they do this every week. Yeah, every new episode of SpongeBob SquarePants has something over the top, has some goofiness with SpongeBob and Patrick, and we as the audience are the patrons of this bus just oohing and eyeing, and the bus driver is a representative of people who do not like SpongeBob and just want to drive that bus out of there. And as this episode ends, I have to say it's one of my favorite SpongeBob and Patrick endings of the show. This is the kind of ending that if there was ever an ideal way to quote unquote end SpongeBob SquarePants as a whole, I think having an ending where SpongeBob and Patrick run into a field of colorful jellyfish is as beautiful of an ending as you can think of. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Pink Purloiner, a wonderful episode, which, another thing I forgot to mention, another little pin of this episode I loved, is when SpongeBob, wearing the handlebar mustache, was offering all of this money for the net that Patrick had. He brings up, as he's going down the list of the currencies he wouldn't take, $1 million, $1,000, $1. I wouldn't even take $1 for this gift. It really cemented, going back and rewatching, how much Patrick loves his friendship with SpongeBob. And thinking about my own Patrick in this situation in my life, Alex, I'm blessed to have him. I'm blessed to have somebody who can, at the end of situations like that, realize that there's more to a person than a mistake. We all make mistakes out there. We can even purloin from someone in a moment of selfishness, a moment of need, a moment of desire, a moment of weakness. But at the end of the day, it's the actions you have ahead of you, what you do tomorrow, that can define you more than what you can do today. Even through what SpongeBob and Patrick went through, a rough set of emotions for SpongeBob, and then having all of that come forward in front of Patrick to the point that he has to feel like he needs to leave. Having all of that happen, and then moving on forward from that, being able to turn the page to tomorrow, will help strengthen both of their friendships, as is the negative situations that Alex and I have been through. And I'm sure any person out there who has someone they consider their best friend can point to any of the hills and valleys that you have gone through together and how you have ended up on the other end. It's what strengthens you as friends. It's what strengthens the bonds that we make as people with our family members, with others out there. Even when you go through a negative situation, sometimes it is how you handle that situation which can then lead to a more beautiful, positive outlook. And then you can look back on those negatives and be thankful for where you're at now. I'm sure I'm not the only one out there who has purloined in their past, who then goes on to get past that and to make sure that every day they live on this planet, they're bringing more smiles into it than the frowns of purloining others, or stealing, thieving, pilfering, looting, whatever word you want to use. It's never a good thing. Even in the Robin Hood mentality, you never know the domino effect you may be creating. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of I'm Ready, a SpongePod Squarecast, a labor of love and a podcast for any SpongeBob fan out there. If you know any extra fans who may want to join on the Ready crew, anybody who even has a semblance of goofy gooberness, please share this podcast. If you would like to follow the Captain on social media, once again, my name is Captain Eric, and you can find me on Twitter at I'm Ready Podcast and on Instagram at SpongeBob Podcast. If you are looking to support the Captain, though, the absolute best thing you can do is subscribe to the Captain Eric YouTube channel. youtube.com/@thecaptaineric, or clicking on that link in the podcast description below brings you right to the YouTube page. Click on that subscribe button. Do not feel inclined to hit on that bell unless you would like to know anytime the Captain puts something out or goes live, because at this point It's completely random. There's not a set schedule yet, but eventually there will be. But for right now, it's random. If you subscribe, you have my undeniable love. Thank you for joining the Ready Crew. And if you'd like to ever go the extra mile in terms of support, you can click on that Redbubble link in the podcast description below. There you will find Captain Eric designs that you can put on a multitude of different products. Anything that comes in from my projects go directly back into my projects, and it's always appreciated. Your attention is worthwhile. I love each and every one of you on the Ready Crew. Thank you for joining me each and every week and hanging out and talking about some good old SpongeBob SquarePants right here on this podcast. So, as always, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and come aboard again to another episode of I'm Ready! A SpongePod Squarecast.
For SpongeBob. You made me a new jellyfishing net? That is so thoughtful of you. Patrick, what you doing, best friend?
I'm not your best friend. I'm a no-good jelly netting fish.
Where are you going?
I'm leaving Bikini Bottom while I still have my dignity.
Patrick, no!